The story of the city of Nazareth has always carried a special resonance in world history, known globally as the place associated with Jesus of Nazareth. This city in northern Israel has often been viewed as a spiritual and cultural center rather than a battlefield. Yet in times of conflict, even such symbolic locations have not been spared from destruction. Today we are diving deep into the condition of Nazareth when reports surfaced of a surprise attack that left 2,700 houses destroyed. To truly understand the scale and meaning of such devastation, it is important not only to look at the immediate aftermath, but also to examine the city's layout, architectural character, population structure, and the elements that made it a unique urban space before it was struck. Nazareth has always stood apart as a city where tradition and modernity blended seamlessly. Before the attack, the city's residential districts were a mix of ancient stone houses, Ottoman-era architecture, and more contemporary Israeli-style concrete structures. Each of these homes carried unique features. The older buildings were characterized by thick limestone walls that provided insulation against both heat and cold, arched doorways, and red-tiled roofs that gave the skyline of Nazareth its Mediterranean charm. The newer homes reflected post-1948 Israeli urban planning with box-like designs, flat rooftops used for both utility and leisure, and simple facades intended to maximize space in an expanding city. Together, these 2,700 homes represented not just shelter, but the fabric of a community. When the attack struck unexpectedly, the scale of damage revealed more than just structural weakness. Modern concrete houses might have been assumed to withstand shockwaves better than their centuries-old counterparts. But the reality was different, because many were built in densely packed neighborhoods with limited spacing. The blast waves reverberated across narrow streets, magnifying the destruction. This highlights a performance aspect of urban design that often goes unnoticed until tragedy strikes. Ancient stone houses with their thick supporting walls sometimes managed to remain partially standing despite direct impact, whereas thinner-walled modern constructions collapsed more easily under the same force. This duality between tradition and modernity in architecture became painfully evident in the aftermath. From a technical perspective, the sheer number of houses destroyed 2,700 is staggering for a city the size of Nazareth. With an estimated population of around 80,000 people, such destruction meant that a significant percentage of families were instantly displaced. Each home averaged between 80 to 150 square meters, often housing extended families. If one calculates conservatively, that means anywhere from 12,000 to 18,000 people were directly affected by losing their homes in the attack. The scale of human displacement cannot be overstated. Schools, churches, mosques, and community centers suddenly became makeshift shelters, highlighting how public infrastructure often doubles as emergency relief in war-torn zones. To the casual observer, the destruction of houses might seem like just another military statistic. But to understand Nazareth, one must grasp the cultural and spiritual symbolism embedded in these homes. Many were intergenerational family houses, built with the sweat of grandparents and maintained by their children. Some contained historic features such as carved wooden doors or interior mosaics, reflecting the city's Christian and Muslim heritage. Losing 2,700 of these homes was not just the loss of property, but an erasure of heritage. For example, certain districts, like the old city of Nazareth, had clusters of traditional homes that dated back over 200 years. Their destruction meant that parts of the city's unique urban character were wiped away permanently. From a design element perspective, Nazareth had something that set it apart from other cities in Israel. The blending of religious architecture, church domes, mosque minarets, and synagogue struces created a diverse urban skyline. Residential homes were often built within walking distance of these religious landmarks, and family life was deeply tied to daily worship and community gatherings. The destruction of 2,700 houses disrupted this ecosystem. Families who once lived near their places of worship suddenly found themselves scattered, forced into temporary housing in entirely different parts of the city. This shift disrupted not just physical living spaces, but also social rhythms and spiritual practices. Another key feature of Nazareth's urban fabric was its reliance on narrow, winding alleyways rather than wide boulevards. These alleys were both a charm and a vulnerability. They gave the city its historic character, reminiscent of ancient towns across the Levant. But they also meant that emergency services like fire brigades and ambulances had difficulty accessing bombed-out homes. In the hours following the attack, rescue workers struggled to reach families trapped under rubble because vehicles could not maneuver through the narrow streets. This reveals a performance aspect of city design where heritage charm collides with modern safety needs. It's an issue urban planners around the world continue to wrestle with: how to preserve history while ensuring accessibility and resilience. On a human level, the surprise nature of the attack intensified the psychological impact. Civilians in Nazareth had lived through previous wars and conflicts, but the city had largely been spared from widespread destruction in modern times. To wake up to the sound of explosions and watch entire neighborhoods crumble in minutes was an unimaginable shock. Survivors describe walls collapsing, ceilings caving in, and dust filling the air so densely that visibility dropped to almost nothing. Children cried in panic while parents scrambled to protect them, often with nothing but their own bodies as shields. This shared trauma has left deep scars on the community's psyche, scars that will endure far longer than the physical rubble. Unique selling points of Nazareth before the attack revolved around its dual identity. A city of history and spirituality that also embraced modern commerce and tourism. Pilgrims from across the world visited sites like the Basilica of the Annunciation, the Church of St. Joseph, and ancient springs tied to biblical narratives. Local businesses thrived on this tourism, with guest houses, markets, and artisan shops forming the economic backbone. When 2,700 homes were destroyed, many of these businesses also collapsed, because owners lived in the same structures where they worked. In Nazareth, the line between residential and commercial space was often blurred. For instance, a family might operate a bakery on the ground floor while living upstairs. When the building was reduced to rubble, both livelihood and shelter were lost in a single blow. Economically, the cost of such destruction runs into hundreds of millions of dollars. Each home would take anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000 to rebuild, depending on size and design. Multiply that by 2,700, and the reconstruction bill alone exceeds $500 million, not including infrastructure repair. Water pipes, sewage systems, and electricity lines running beneath the destroyed neighborhoods were also obliterated. This forced engineers to consider not just rebuilding homes, but redesigning entire districts from the ground up. For many families, insurance coverage did not exist, meaning the burden of loss fell directly on them and on limited government aid programs. One cannot ignore the ripple effects such devastation has on community cohesion. Nazareth, historically, was one of the few cities in Israel with a majority Arab population, predominantly Christian and Muslim. The destruction of 2,700 homes created an urgent housing crisis that intensified competition for limited resources. Families crowded into surviving homes, sometimes with 3 or 4 families sharing one structure. Schools were converted into shelters, forcing students to halt their education. Churches and mosques opened their doors for displaced families, turning sacred spaces into humanitarian hubs. While this showcased solidarity, it also placed immense strain on institutions not designed for prolonged refugee management. From a performance analysis standpoint, the city's emergency preparedness was severely tested. Fire brigades had limited water pressure due to damaged infrastructure. Hospitals overflowed with the injured and communication networks collapsed under the sudden surge of emergency calls. The surprise nature of the attack meant there was no chance to evacuate vulnerable neighborhoods in advance. This underscores a fundamental truth about urban resilience. Preparedness is only as strong as the weakest link in infrastructure. In Nazareth's case, its historic layout and reliance on outdated systems created vulnerabilities that amplified the scale of destruction. Looking at design elements that failed, rooftops became both a blessing and a curse. In peacetime, flat rooftops in Nazareth were multi-purpose spaces used for drying laundry, growing plants, or spending cool evenings with family. During the attack, these rooftops collapsed almost instantly, crushing anyone who sought refuge beneath them. However, in some cases, they provided escape routes when staircases were blocked by debris. People climbed across adjoining rooftops to flee danger. This illustrates how features of design can play contradictory roles in moments of crises. One cannot overlook the symbolic blow to Nazareth's identity. For centuries, it has been marketed as a city of peace. a spiritual home for Christians worldwide, and a place where Muslims and Christians coexist side by side. The destruction of 2,700 homes painted a very different picture to the global audience watching the news. Images of rubble, displaced families, and crying children contrasted sharply with tourist brochures showing holy sites bathed in golden light. This duality has reshaped global perception, making Nazareth not only a symbol of faith but also a symbol of human vulnerability in modern warfare. The recovery process is another area worth exploring. Rebuilding a city after such devastation is not simply about bricks and mortar. It involves rethinking urban planning to prevent repeat catastrophes. Should new homes be built in the same style as the old to preserve cultural heritage, or should they adopt modern, reinforced concrete designs to improve resilience? Should narrow alleyways be widened to allow emergency access, even if it means erasing part of the city's historic charm? These are debates that residents, architects, and policymakers must confront together. The balance between preservation and modernization will define Nazareth's future identity. The international response has also been a key factor. Aid organizations rushed to provide tents, food, and medical supplies, but the sheer number of displaced people overwhelmed their capacity. Foreign governments pledged support, yet the politics of the Israeli-Palestine conflict complicated aid distribution. For some global audiences, the destruction of Nazareth symbolized yet another tragedy in an already volatile region. For others, it became a rallying point for calls to protect cultural heritage in times of war. UNESCO and other cultural organizations highlighted the urgent need to safeguard what remained of Nazareth's historic sites from further damage. Perhaps one of the most striking elements of the attack is how it redefined community resilience. Despite losing 2,700 homes, families came together to support one another. Neighbor helped neighbor clear rubble. Volunteers organized food distribution. And religious leaders provided not just material aid, but also emotional comfort. The spirit of Nazareth survived even as its physical structures crumbled. This resilience itself is a kind of performance aspect, not of architecture or infrastructure, but of human character. It is the intangible yet most crucial design element of any city: its people. The destruction of Nazareth serves as both a tragedy and a lesson. It reveals how architecture, urban planning, and cultural identity intertwine in ways that amplify or mitigate disaster. It shows that homes are not just buildings, but vessels of memory, economy, and spirituality. It demonstrates that design choices, from wall thickness to street layout, can determine life or death in moments of crises. And most importantly, it underscores that the true strength of a city lies not in its structures, but in the resilience of its community.